We're very happy today again to have Bruce Wergeland. For those of you that have just, oh wow, look at that, who have never met Bruce before, Bruce is a teacher at Langley Christian School, and he's also a teaching pastor here at Home Church Langley. And he has been working slowly but surely through Psalm 16, verse by verse. And the springboard for him today is verses 7 and 8. But I'll let him introduce it. Come on up, Bruce. Did you grab your... Oh, you got it on already. Good. Excellent. See, the guy's always ready. He's always on top of it.
Well, it all began with a can of paint. I was about 33 years old, and I was in Victoria visiting my parents. And for some reason, I don't even remember, I had to take a can of paint back to the store. And the name of the store was Lumber World. And I had grown up in Victoria visiting this store with my father, who was a house builder. I knew exactly where to go. I knew it was located. I knew as soon as I went into the store where the customer service desk was for returns. And as I pulled into the parking lot in my little white Nissan pickup, I went and grabbed for the paint can beside me on the seat and the receipt, and I thought, no, I better just take the receipt with me. And I walked into the store, and I walked through the aisles, went through the paint section up to the customer service desk, and I laid my receipt down, and I said, I need to return a can of paint. And they looked at me, well, where's the can? I said, well, it's in my truck. Well, why is it in your truck? I said, well, I didn't want to come in and walk through your paint aisle and come to the desk with a receipt and a can of paint because you might think that I just picked up a can of paint off the shelf and I was returning it. And they said, okay. So I went and got my can of paint. And as I was walking back out to my truck and I grabbed my can of paint and I came back in, I started to think, how do they know that I didn't just pull this off the shelf? And I still have my can of paint in the truck. And so when I went up and they were ringing it through and giving me my refund, I said, just out of curiosity, how do you know that I actually brought the same can of paint back for a refund? They said, we don't. And a light dawned on me. The curse of knowledge opened my eyes to possibilities of all kinds of things. Yes, you're absolutely right. In the next 15 minutes, as I tell a number of stories, I'm going to pass this can of paint around. I found it in my basement last night. I have no idea why I bought this color of paint. It's brand new. It's never been opened. And so I just want you to hold this big, awkward, heavy, brand new, never opened can of paint. And I don't want you just to kind of quickly pass it to the next person like it's a hot potato, but I want you to hold it, maybe give it a little shake, caress it like it's a pet, name it, talk to it, maybe listen to it. You might hear the ocean, but just kind of hold it for a moment and then pass it on to the next person. And over the next 15 or 20 minutes, I just want it to work its way through however that looks, and I want everyone just to grab hold of this can of paint. So, Pastor Jim, if you would do me the honors and start that off. Well, the possibilities since that day have been numerous. And I don't know if you have the type of devious mind that I do, but ever since that day at Lumber World, where I returned that can of paint, I have been seeing opportunities to be dishonest left, right, and center. 2 years ago, I bought a bag of fertilizer at Walmart. And it was grass seed mixed with fertilizer. And I overseeded my lawn. And about 2 weeks later, I had no grass, but I had a lot of mushrooms. And I was pretty upset because I had paid $20 or $25 for this grass seed and done a lot of work to prep the ground. And so I said, you know what? I'm going to go back to Walmart and see if I can get a new bag or a different bag. So I walked into Walmart, went up to the customer service bag with an empty plastic bag. And I explained to them, I said, this is what I did, this is what I got. What can you do for me? And they said, well, we don't have any more of that. So you can either go back and find a different one, or we can just give you a return. And so they ended up giving me a store credit. And I asked them, I said, how do you know that I didn't find this in the dumpster out behind your store and I'm bringing it in? They said, we don't. In fact, anything under $50, we don't even ask questions. I went, really? Really? This past fall, I was in Home Depot, and I needed to put a backsplash behind a counter, which is the painted wall. It was getting dirty. Couldn't clean it anymore. And I was thinking about tiles, and I thought, it's so much work. So I found this new product at Home Depot, and it's a plastic. It comes in sheets, and it looks like tiles. And you just pull the back off. It's like a giant sticker. And just, bam, you put it on. I thought, this is going to take me no time at all. But it was pretty expensive. To do a little backsplash was about $90. And it was actually more than if I bought tile. But I thought, for saving the time, I would do it. So I took it home, worked with it, cut it all out, put it on, looked great. A week later, the corners all started lifting. They wouldn't stick. And so I'd push them down. Day later, they started peeling up again, and I'm like, I just wasted a whole bunch of time and money. I thought, I'm going to go back to Home Depot and see what they say. See what my options are. I thought, at the very least, maybe they'll give me some kind of a store credit, or they'll give me new ones. And so I went in, and I had my Home Depot bag full of all the remnants, the scraps, the packaging, just the garbage. And I walked up and I said, this is what happened. What do I do? And they said, well, we can either give you a gift card or we can give you cash. And I was like, you're going to give me cash for scraps? And they said, yeah, we haven't had this problem, but sir, if you're not happy with the product, we'd like to give you your money back or let you get some more. And I said, well, I don't want any more because I'm already frustrated with it. I'm sure you've been to Costco and seen what people return in the Costco return line. It's fascinating. I was there a couple nights ago, and a guy came in with half a bag of salad. Half a bag of salad. And I don't know what his reason was, if it was going bad or he didn't like it. He got his money back. Before Christmas, I bought a couple DVDs for my kids and myself. And one of them, we watched right till the end, and in the last 10 minutes, right at the climax of the movie, it all started pixelating and glitching. And I'm like, no! And you could hear the sound, but you couldn't really see anything. And so I went back to the store, I think it was Target, and I said, this is what happened. And they said, well, go back and get another copy. And I went back, and they had no more copies. I talked to the guy there. They said, yeah, it was a bargain deal. We're not going to get any more. You'd have to order it online. And so I walked up to the front, and they said to me, well, we can give you your money back. And I'm like, wow. I never have to buy another DVD. I'll just come to the store, watch it. I could go back and say there's a problem with it, and I get a new DVD every time. So for the last 15 years, my mind has been thinking, considering the options of I could become a thief, I could steal small items, and at the very worst, if I got caught, I could just say, I was just returning it, or I didn't know. I mean, the ability to be dishonest and rip people off, I've experienced it just kind of bumping into it. But I can't stop thinking about how easy it is to be a thief, to take advantage of situations where the opportunity presents itself, often very innocently. I want to talk about the Greeks and the Jews for a moment. The Greek culture was a culture that was very communal. People worshipped the dead. In Greek cities, you had temples where you would go and you would sacrifice and you would honor and remember and pray to the dead, to your ancestors. It was very, very communal. The Greek culture also brought us incredible language and philosophy. And that's really what we've inherited from the Greeks. There was 3 pictures. They're still there. Plato, Socrates, and the one that's not there, the other famous philosopher is Aristotle. And we got from these great philosophers the idea of thinking and truth and language. And what we acquired from the Greeks really isn't so much their sense of community, but their sense of what it means to be an individual and to think and to intellectualize and to take ideas and make them private. Socrates said, "An unexamined life isn't worth living." That's a quote he's remembered for. In other words, look inside of yourself. What is inside you that tells you that it is true or it is right or wrong? Plato, his student, wrote a book called The Republic, where he talked about what it meant to govern, for the smart, elite, intelligent few people to govern the masses. And he used this analogy of a cave. And in the cave, there was people who were bound hand and foot, and they had a yoke of some kind on their neck so they could only look one way. So they couldn't turn and look at their neighbor, and they couldn't look behind them. And they looked at the cave wall, and they saw things moving. They saw shadows. And they heard voices. And the shadows and the voices came from behind them and were cast onto the cave wall, but they couldn't look behind them to see the real people. All they could see were the shadows and hear the voices. And until that yoke was removed from their neck and they could actually turn around and see there were people moving behind them outside of the cave, they didn't know. And Plato described that as an individual being enlightened, suddenly understanding the world in a way they couldn't before. But it was all very private, all very individual. And then Aristotle, his pupil, we don't even really know much about Aristotle because all of his writing was lost. And what we get from him are the words of his pupils. And they're very intellectual, very philosophical, very private things to think about and talk about. And we get no idea of how Aristotle actually interacted with his pupils when they were writing down his words or his notes. So from the Greeks, we've inherited this idea of thinking, rationalizing, critiquing, analyzing, but it's all in our head, it's all in our mind. And the Greeks have brought wonderful things for Christianity. Some of the words that we use, that the early church fathers used, like the Latin word trinitas, which is in our English Trinity. The language, the understanding to be abstract and talk about God and the nature of Jesus and the incarnation and the Trinity. The Greek language and the Greek philosophy helped us do that. But it stays up here. So when I think about stealing from Walmart, Costco, Home Depot, or Target, what initially stops me from doing it is thinking about the consequences. It might be guilt. It might be fear from being punishment, shame from being caught, walking through that detector and it going off. Yesterday I was at HMV in the mall picking up the homestay student that lives with me. And I had a DVD in my hand, and I was coming into HMV, that's the music store that sells CDs in Willowbrook Mall, and the alarm went off, like I was just inside. And all I had to do was to look over at the cashier and go, "Yeah, it's just me, it's okay. I've already paid for them." And it made me think again about how easy it would be to walk out of the store and go, slip them into a bag and go, "Yeah, right here. Yeah, I did pay for them. I'm on my way, thanks. Have a good day." The Jews, on the other hand, had a history of living in community. So the temple was built. They had the Torah, the first 5 books of the Old Testament, and they lived and they met and they talked about. And when Jews talked about their faith, when they talked about God, it wasn't who God is, like a Greek. It was, this is what God has done for us. This is who Abraham was. This is what Moses did when we crossed the Red Sea. This is what happened in Egypt with Joseph and his 12 sons. And they would constantly talk about what had been done. And their whole life revolved around the temple in Jerusalem and around the local synagogue that would be in each town throughout their nation. And you would meet, and you would talk, and you would discuss, and you would live out your life in that discussion with the people that you saw every day. And so in 586, when the Babylonians, Nebuchadnezzar, came, they leveled the temple. That identity of the Jewish people, that thing that cemented them together, the practice of going to the temple, of praying, of making donations, of being there at Passover later on when the sacrifices would be made. And then again, in 70 A.D., when Herod's temple was destroyed by the Romans, they took care of that identity. Everything that cemented that culture together, that demonstrated how they would live out their faith and live their lives together as a people, was flattened. And it was devastating for the Jewish people because that temple was what they did. It showed how they practiced, how they lived out their faith. So for a Jew, your faith is in the daily working out, that living, the community, the relationships you have with people. So the thing that stops me from stealing from Costco, Home Depot, Target, or Walmart is that idea that I'm damaging someone's business, or I won't be able to look at someone in the eye who works there as I walk out with something I've stolen. There's a connection, a personal idea, if I live like a Jew rather than a Greek. And that's the tension I've been in for the last 15 years, is trying to balance between the mind, what I've learned from the Greeks, and the heart, what it means to live like a Jew, to work out that faith in relation, in community, in covenant. So here we are with Psalm 16. Keep me safe, O God, for in you I take refuge. I said to the Lord, you are my Lord. Apart from you I have no good thing. As for the saints who are in the land, they are the glorious ones in whom is all my delight. The sorrows of those will increase who run after other gods. I will not pour out their drinks of blood or take up their names on my lips. Lord, you are my portion and my cup. You have made my lot secure. The boundary lines have fallen for me in pleasant places. Surely I have a delightful inheritance. And now we get to the two verses today. I will praise the Lord who counsels me. Even at night my heart instructs me. I will set the Lord always before me. Because he is at my right hand, I will not be shaken. I will praise the Lord who counsels me. 2 years ago, I pulled out of the Prospero Bank at 200th and Willowbrook Way. I don't know if you can picture that in downtown Langley. I hate that intersection. It's just always busy. I pulled out. I had quickly put on my seatbelt, but it was messed up a little bit. And I got out onto the road, and I'm slowing down by the Mohawk gas station at a red light, and I've disconnected my seatbelt, and I'm in the process of fixing it up, and something to the right over on the sidewalk at the Mohawk gas station catches my eye. And as I've got my seatbelt in my hand, I turn, and there's 3 police officers wearing fluorescent vests. And as fate would have it, 2 of them were looking up the street. I don't even know what they were looking for. If they were looking for people like me not having their seatbelt on or cell phones, I don't know. But the one closest to me looks right at me. And our eyes lock. I felt like it was in a movie. Because I was just like, I can't believe this is happening. Because if I hadn't looked at him, the light was turning green, I'd have been out of there. If there hadn't been a red light, I would have just cruised right through. He would have never seen me do the whoosh, whoosh. He just looks at me and goes, come here. I'm like, no. So he pulls me in. I tell him what I was doing. I was fixing my belt. He writes me a ticket and says, have a great day, sir. So I'm mad. I'm mad. And there has never been a ticket that I haven't disputed. And most of the time I lose, but it is my right as a citizen of BC. And I disputed this ticket. Right away I sent it in. And when I phoned in to check, I said, how long am I going to have to wait? And they said about 6 to 8 months. And I was expecting that. After a year, I went, I'm free! They realized their mistake, and it's over. I'm done with this. In November, I got some mail telling me when I needed to appear in provincial court to dispute my ticket. I was like, oh, man. So 2 weeks ago, I went in. 2 years later. I had to wait 2 years to do this. So it worked out perfect with my job. I didn't have to teach when I was supposed to be in court. So I told my principal I got to go to court, dispute a ticket. So off I went. And I'd been once before to dispute, so I kind of knew how things work. So I went there a little bit early, and I knew that the police officer would be there, and he would try and settle out of court. So I was ready to negotiate. I had my plan. I was thinking like a Greek. I had all my arguments laid out. I was going to give him details because I was thinking he's never going to remember. That was 2 years ago. So I get there. I sit down. Sure enough, police officer walks over with his big folder and says, sir, can I have your name? Give him my name. So he looks through, reads the particulars, and it's the same officer from 2 years ago. I recognize his name and his face. And I'm like, shoot. I was hoping to be someone different or they wouldn't show up and then you get to go. And he says, well, tell me what you'd like to do. You're here to dispute it. Are you willing to plead guilty or do you want to go in and argue your case? And I said, no, I'm here to argue and this is why. And he read his notes that he'd written on the ticket. And he said, well, Mr. Wergelin, you told me yourself when I gave you the ticket that you were not wearing your seatbelt. And I'm like, absolutely. I stopped at a red light. I was just adjusting it. He goes, sir, I'm sorry, but if you're on the road, it doesn't matter if you're stopped, parked, you're run out of gas, your car is not running. By law, you have to have a seatbelt on. I went, really? He goes, yes, that's the law. And I said, so my odds of winning in court probably aren't that great. And he goes, well, I'm not going to tell you what to do, but this is how it works. There's about 20 people here today, and we're all going to go in, and the people who are going to just plead innocent and maybe ask for a reduction or more time to pay, we're going to get them out of the way first. And then the people who want to present their case, they'll go afterwards. And I'm like, well, how long is that going to take? He goes, probably 2 or 3 hours. I'm like, I don't have 2 or 3 hours. And he goes, sir, I can't tell you what to do, but here's the situation, and I'm willing to represent you any way you want. If you need more time, or if you're in financial difficulty, whatever it is, I'm willing to present that to the court. And he was really gracious about it. And as I talked to the police officer and listened to the way he was speaking, and he was trying to help and resolve this, I thought, this isn't a fight that I want. And all that arguing and rationalizing and good details and arguments that I had locked up in my head like a good Greek, I suddenly went, I just need to live this out as a citizen of BC and make this work the best I can in the interest of myself, of the court, and the police officer. So I said to him, you know what? I'm going to plead guilty and ask for a reduction. So I went in. And if you've never been to traffic court, oh my, it is entertaining. The next time you get a ticket, just dispute it, even if you know you're wrong, and go to traffic court. Because you get people from all walks of life in there. You've got people dressed to the nines. I don't know if they're trying to sway the judge with the way they look. You've got people that just woke up and they've thrown on sweatpants and a baseball cap, and we're all in there together. And sure enough, as the police officer told me, they just started putting people through as quickly as possible. And there was a couple people in front of me that got dismissed. I was just like, oh, police officer didn't show up, or it was done illegally, or there was some little technicality, and you could just see the person, just their body language. They just went, yes, and they turned around and walked out. And I got to my turn, and I went up front, and the judge read out what happened and said, Mr. Wergeland, you're going to plead guilty with reduction. And I said, yes, sir. And I left. And I couldn't help but think, and still think, how much I appreciated the counsel and advice and experience and knowledge that that police officer gave me before I had to go before the judge. And how much that made a difference. Because if I had just walked in there and it had just been me and the judge, it would have been a fight. It would have been me presenting my case, these are my reasons, and there would not have been a sense at all of any kind of a relationship. This is what I want you to do. I want you to think of a time in your life where someone counseled you, gave you advice, and you were so grateful, either during or afterwards. You look back at it and you go, I am so glad they were there. I am so glad I listened to them. I'm so glad they made me understand it differently, because it changed my decision and it changed the possible consequences of what may have happened. It might be something small. It might be something big, like about a job decision or a marriage decision. See if you can think of something, turn to someone around you, and share with them. This is what that advice or that counseling did for me that day. Go ahead, I'll give you a couple minutes. White. Isn't that great to think about people who have spoken into your life, people that God has placed in your life that maybe have given you a scripture? I've got a friend, he's a longshoreman, and sometimes his nights are slow, and he'll send me texts. He'll just send me scripture that's on his heart or he's reading, and he just speaks it into my life. Or just practical wisdom that people speak into our lives that God just sends. And if you're anything like me, there's points in your life where you just go, I am so glad that that came to me when I had to make that decision, because it made all the difference. I will praise the Lord who counsels me. Even at night, my heart instructs me. I am fascinated by what happens when we sleep. And I've got my clock radio here that is not so much a friend anymore. Because for about the last 3 years, I usually wake up before it does, because my sleeping patterns have become so strange since I've been in my mid-40s. But I think back to when I was in university, when I was 18, 19, 20, 21, and as I began to figure out what it meant to be a student and to manage my time and to not stay up too late and to try and get homework done when it should be done and not be one of those person that pulled all-nighters. I only did that once in my life, and it was my worst decision. I fell asleep during my exam for a few minutes, and I know what I wrote during that exam was just absolute nonsense because I could not even think clearly. But after that experience, I began to learn that I needed to pace myself with my studying for exams. I needed to stretch it out. I couldn't cram. I had to start early. I had to break it up. I had to strategize. And in 1990, my second to last year of my education degree, I was taking an earth sciences course. And the exam was on a Saturday morning. And I'd been studying all week. And on Friday night, I studied for a couple hours, and I was starting to get tired, and I just felt like things weren't happening. And I just thought to myself, I'm going to just pack it in early, go to bed early, and I'll get up a couple hours early when I feel fresh, and I'll start studying some more then. And my hope was that that break and that rest would kind of cement what I knew already, and then when I woke up in the morning, I'd still remember from the night before, and then I would carry on. That was my plan. And the next morning, I woke up at 9 o'clock, and my exam was starting at 9 o'clock. And I wasn't real far away, but I was far enough away that by the time I got into that exam room, which was a giant gymnasium with about 300 people writing multiple exams, I came in, and I had just thrown on stuff, and my body language and the way I looked, the invigilator running the exam knew right away that I had made a huge mistake. So they approached me and said, what can we do for you? How can we help you? What exam are you here for? I said, earth science. So they went across the gym, found the instructor for the earth science exam who was invigilating the exam, and she came back with a little bit of consternation on her face and said, normally we could let you in. However, one of your classmates has already left. I'm like, the exam's only been going for 25 minutes. It's a 3-hour exam. And we're like, yeah, we know. They didn't do very well on their exam, but because they've left, you can't come in because we have no idea what has transpired since they left and you got here. And I was devastated. I was like, what do I do? They said, well, you need to call the dean of your faculty, the Department of Education, and see what they can do. So I run home, and I don't know how I found the number, and I don't know why this guy answered his phone on a Saturday, but I got a hold of the dean of education, and I just laid it out. I messed up, and I missed my exam. He says, come and see me Monday morning. So I went in on Monday morning, and I had no clue what I was going to do, because everyone over the weekend that I told my story to just said, you're an idiot. What were you thinking? Going to bed, not being prepared? We've never heard of this. You're done. And so I went in Monday morning and saw the dean of the Faculty of Education, and he said, I've made some phone calls. Here are your options. Your professor has already gone back to Europe to study. He's gone. So you can either write the exam during the summer period And I was going to school in Winnipeg, University of Manitoba, and I didn't live there. I was going home to work. I was like, well, I can't stay here, come back in the summer. Well, I guess I could. Or you can write it next fall when you come back for your final year of school. Or it can be based on your term work that you did, all your term exams. We don't know what we're going to do, but those are our three options. And when we get a hold of your professor, we're going to have to make a decision. So I went home to work for the summer, and all summer I waited to find out. And by the beginning of August, I got a letter in the mail, and the letter said, it seems like the best option is for us to base your grade on the tests you did during the year rather than your final exam. I was like, yes! Because the tests during the year were worth 40% of your grade, and I had gotten A's on all of them. The final exam was worth 60% of your grade, and it said in the letter, by the way, the average for that exam was really low because it was so difficult. And I was like, how did I manage to get that blessing in my life? And I'll never forget the gratitude that I took from that letter. They had no idea how that blessed me and affected me, hearing that news at the end of my summer and getting ready for my last year of university. And since that time, afterwards, studying for exams, or even when I teach, even when I prepare my messages on Sundays, it's taught me to really think about the way you manage your time and to be careful that you don't leave too much too long. And so for me, when it comes to studying or reading or preparing something, it's about living it. Not leaving it till the night before and risking things, but starting it weeks in advance and just allowing those ideas just to percolate and live out in my life and to be a part of who I am and to see examples in my daily life with my students or my family and go, that fits exactly with what I want to talk about. And so at nighttime, I use that sleeping time as a break. That sleeping time, hoping that when I wake up in the morning, God will bless me with something new to think about or to consider. And that rest will allow me to consider the ideas that I want to teach to my students or speak with you. In fact, I have a friend who I talked to this about a couple weeks ago, and his strategy in university was he would actually cram and go to sleep and then wake up in the morning, and he believed with all his heart that he actually knew and remembered more in the morning when he woke up. So he took it one step further, and he would purposely cram a lot the night before and then spend maybe a nap sleeping or some time sleeping, and he found that it actually allowed things to be understood and more clear in the morning because of that rest. I don't know what you do with sleeping, so I'm curious how that all works out with you as far as trying to make a decision or to learn something or remember something. So I want to do a little poll here this morning, because the beauty is we're all a little bit different. So the first question I have is this: when do you do your best work? Creative work, getting things done. Maybe you have to do it on your own. Maybe it's housework or working on your car or reading a book. What time of the day is it best for you when you have to do something really meaningful? So just by a raise of hands, how many night owls do we have here? Late at night, the house is quiet, that's when I function at my best. Okay, a few people. Good. How many of you, like me, when I get up in the morning and I've had a rest and my mind's clear, that's when I'm ready to go? How many people? Where are the morning people? Wow. Okay. How many of you is it later on in the morning, you've maybe had that first coffee or you've been out of the house a little bit and you're rolling? Okay, a few of you. Okay. How many of you, you like to have maybe some kind of a nap or power nap and in that afternoon or early evening, you've got your second wind. Anybody like that? Yeah, interesting, eh? We all kind of peak at different times of the day. So here's my next question. I told you about my poor sleeping patterns that I've had for the last few years. I'm curious, on average, how long you sleep each night. So, let's start with 4 hours or less on average. On average. Maybe some nights it's a few more. Okay, 4 hours or less, and that's enough for you, hopefully. 6 hours or less. 8 hours? 8 hours? Okay. And who definitely sleeps for more than 8 hours a night? Your body just needs more than 8 hours to function. Good. All right. Here's an interesting question. What keeps you from sleeping? What makes it difficult for you to sleep? Anybody, anxiety, thinking about work or finances? It's a regular thing. You just, I can't get to sleep again because I'm worried about that. All right? How many of you, it's caffeine? You drink the wrong drink too late, and that just does you in. You're not getting to sleep. All right? What about you've just watched a really intriguing movie, or you've read a really good book, and you're just going? Who? Yep. Okay. A lot of you didn't put up your hand. Anybody else? I'm just curious. What is it for you, Frank?
Sports.
Playing or watching?
Both.
Okay. Good. Okay. Good one. Anybody? Yep. Pain. Okay. And my last question, what is it that you do to help you sleep? Either fall asleep or to sleep better or longer or more restfully. How many people, if you eat something, helps you? Eating. Last night I was eating a mini wheats in bed because my stomach was starting to rumble, and I know that if my stomach's growling before I go to bed, I'll wake up at least once. It's sad, but it's true. That's what I have to do. My wife is quite ashamed of the fact that I have to do that. How many of you reading a good book helps you sleep or relax? Okay. What about watching something light on TV? Maybe the news or a sitcom, Seinfeld. Okay, good. What about for you, it's just thinking, reflecting, praying? All right. Very good. Anybody else? Anything else out there? Yep. Okay.
Earplugs.
Okay. Yeah, yes. Okay. Okay.
Watching the late Christian shows.
Okay. Good. Yes, sir. Oh, yes, excellent. Yeah. I like that one. Even at night, my heart instructs me. The Hebrew word for heart is kilia. Say that with me. Kilia. And it doesn't refer to the heart as an organ, and it doesn't even refer to the heart as our emotions. It refers to the idea of our inner being. What matters to us? We might want to use the word soul. I'm not even sure if that fits very well, but it's who we are and what drives us, what gives us energy, what helps us to think about purpose and the things that matter. That kilia. Verse 8, I've set the Lord always before me. I've spent a lot of time traveling overseas, and I love taking pictures of people's faces in other cultures. Whether it's the hat they're wearing, whether it's the color of their skin, whether it's jewelry they're wearing, whether it's an expression that just strikes me as unique in a particular setting. I love to take close-up pictures. Unfortunately, most people don't like it if you walk right up to them like this as a perfect stranger and start snapping their pictures. And in a lot of cultures, even if you ask, they don't like it. They don't know who you are. I probably wouldn't do it if someone from Mozambique or Germany came up to me and maybe spoke in their own language and pointed to their camera and pointed to me. I'd be like, I'm not your tourist object. Run away. So what I've learned to do is to take out my long lens, and most people think that when you have a long lens on a camera, you're taking something very far away. And so I want to take a picture of Frank here, and so I'll stand fairly close to him, and I might stand here for a long time like I'm looking at something way behind Frank. And he can't really tell where that lens is pointing at his face or something just over his head. And so I'll just sit there like I'm taking a nice picture far away. And at some point when Frank has the expression that really captured me, I snap the picture, and Frank is no wiser. But the whole time I've been looking through that lens, all that has mattered to me is Frank's face. I've not been interested in anybody else around him. Even though he thinks I might be looking at something way far away, he has no clue that what is framed in this camera through this long lens is just his face. That's my focus. I've set the Lord always before me. That tension of how we do that. And there's two places that I always return to think about this idea of setting the Lord always before me, not just in my mind like a Greek, but in my heart and the way I live and the way I act that out. And the first person I go to is Brother Lawrence. He was a monk in the 17th century, just outside of Paris in a monastery. And he really had no great education. He wasn't very important in the monastery. In fact, a lot of his time was working in the kitchen, washing dishes. And he wrote a diary about when he was in the monastery, and his words and thoughts didn't get published and really made public until after he died. And his book is known as Practicing His Presence. And Brother Lawrence would fill his day by focusing on God in every single mundane, boring task. So that when he was scrubbing a pot or washing a plate, he was thinking of the blessing of food. Or he was thinking about the person who had given him the plate. Or whatever it was. But he was constantly interacting with his community and with God and trying to make that relevant to who he thought God was. So it wasn't just an intellectual exercise in his mind, but he tried to live it out through his actions. And I love what he says. I got to read this because I can't memorize it and say it as well as he does. Men invent means and methods of coming at God's love. They learn rules and set up devices to remind them of that love. Like a good Greek, we memorize the steps or we get an education. And it seems like a world of trouble to bring oneself into the consciousness of God's presence. In other words, just thinking about it. Always thinking about it. Yet it might be so simple, is it not quicker and easier just to do our common business wholly for the love of Him? In other words, God and who He is has to be more than just thinking about Him and being reminded. But it has to flow out of who we are. And we have to embrace who God is and the blessings of God in every task that we do. That tension between being a Greek or living like a Jew. And then my other place that I have to go to is William Young. And I've read from this book before, The Shack, and I'm reading it to my grade 8s right now. Let me just read you a little piece here. Mac allowed his oar to turn in his hands as he let it play in the water's movements. It feels like living out of relationship. You know, trusting and talking to you is a bit more complicated than just following the rules. What rules are those, Mackenzie? You know, all the things that Scripture tells us that we should do. Okay, she said with some hesitation. And what might those be? You know, about doing good things and avoiding evil, being kind to the poor, reading your Bible, praying and going to church, things like that. I see. And how's that working for you, Mackenzie? He laughed. Well, I've never done it very well. I have moments that aren't too bad, but there's always something I'm struggling with or feeling guilty about. I just figured I needed to try harder, but I find it difficult to sustain that motivation. Mackenzie, she chided, her words flowing with affection. The Bible doesn't teach you to follow rules. It is a picture of Jesus. While words may tell you what God is like and even what he may want from you, you cannot do any of it on your own. Life and living in him is in no other. My goodness, you don't think you could live the righteousness of God on your own, do you? Well, I thought so, sorta, Max said sheepishly. But you got to admit, rules and principles are simpler than relationships. It is true that relationships are a whole lot messier than rules, but rules will never give you answers to the deep questions of the heart. Dipping his hand in the water, he played, watching the patterns his movements made. I'm realizing how few answers I have to anything. You know, you've turned me upside down or inside out or something. Mackenzie, religion is about having the right answers. And sometimes they are right. But I'm about the process that takes you to the living answer. And once you get to him, he will change you, the way you live. There are a lot of smart people who are able to say a lot of right things from their brain because they've been told what the right answers are. But they don't know me. So really, how can their answers be right if they are right? If you understand my drift, she smiled at her pun. So even though they might be right, they're still wrong. I understand what you're saying. I did that for years after I went to seminary and Bible school. I had the right answer sometimes, but I didn't know you. This weekend, sharing life with you has been far more illuminating than any of those answers. So, will I see you again? Mac asked. Of course. You might see me in a piece of art, or music, or silence, or through people, or in creation, or in your joy and sorrow. My ability to communicate is limitless, living and transforming, and it will always be tuned to God's goodness and love. And you will hear me and see me in the Bible in fresh ways. Don't just look for the rules. Look for relationship. Living like a Jew instead of thinking like a Greek. Well, the paint can has arrived back at the front. And you all had a chance to hold it, talk to it, name it, whatever you did. I don't know if you've ever opened a new can of paint after it's been at your house for a couple weeks. Because when you're at the paint store, they put it on that big fancy machine, right, that shakes it. If you've never seen that, you've got to go to the paint store. It's fun, right? They stick it in there, and you can see when they open the doors, there's all kinds of colors in there where paint cans have exploded. Wouldn't that be fun to be there when that happened? And they shake it all up, and it's perfect. But you bring it home, and like me, I just found this in my basement. I don't even know how long it's been there. But if I open this up, it's begun to separate. And if you pry the lid open and try and stir it, it doesn't work well because you end up splashing it everywhere. And so your next option is to put that lid back on and to try shaking it yourself. And it's hard work because when you shake the can, it shakes you. And it's not nearly as good as the machine because it's hard on your back and you can't move as quickly and you feel silly trying to do something that the paint machine could have done in 30 seconds. But you shake away. And in verse 8 it says, because you are at my right hand, I will not be shaken. And there's no way to shake a can of paint without being shaken. The only thing you can do to not be shaken is to put that can down and allow the paint machine to do it for you. And when I thought of paint at the paint store, I thought, how often do I wrestle with a problem? And I try to figure it out like a good Greek. And I like to look for answers on the internet or ask friends or lay awake at night and think about how can I solve this problem? And it shakes me and I can't sleep and it creates anxiety. when really the only way not to be shaken by that problem is to put it down and to give it away and to live in that relationship that I have with my Creator. And as difficult as that is, it's really the only thing that makes sense. Because there's just some things in our humanness that if we hold on to them, they just shake us. And David, the author of this psalm, he was a Jew. He understood what it meant to talk about God and what He had done for him, rather than thinking about who God was. It was all in the practice. It was all in the living. It was all looking back at examples of, God did this for me here. He brought me through here. He gave this to me here. He blessed me with this. And his faith was built on the living out of what God had done, rather than trying to figure out who God is or what his rules might mean for me. I want to close with this passage in Romans 12. Paul, the Apostle Paul, he was a Jew. He came from Jewish parents, but he was raised in a Greek world. The Greek Empire was just fading. The Romans were coming into power around the Mediterranean. And he grew up in a Hellenized world, a world that had been influenced by Greek culture. Historians call it Hellenism. And so he knew Greek. He would have written in Greek. He would have known about the Greek philosophers. He would have known about the Greek language and how it helped him to understand and explain life and purpose and who Jesus was. But he still had that Jewish heritage. And he lived probably more beautifully than anybody else in that tension between being a Jew and being a Greek. And he says this in Romans 12, 1 and 2. Therefore I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as living sacrifices. This is your true and proper worship. Do not conform to the patterns of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good and pleasing and perfect will. And Paul wasn't asking, I don't believe, for us to think like Greeks. When he said renew your mind, I really believe that he wanted us and the Christians in Rome to think more like a Jew. Take your experience, your life in your community, the blessings you've received, the counsel that people have spoken into your life, the things that you have dreamed, the challenges that you've wrestled with and been shaken with, and to live them out in community and in covenant with God. Don't keep it locked up here. But you got to move it down to here. We need both. And God calls us, when we live in that relationship that's described in Psalm 16, is we've got to live with our heart. Amen.